the Museum of Curiosity. Each week I'll be playing the theme tune in a slightly different way. This week I'll be ending with a pointlessly extravagant flourish.
Hello, my name's John Lloyd and I'm the Professor of Curiosity at the University of Buckingham, and scurrying down the rabbit hole of inquiry with me today, as ever, is the curator of the Museum of Curiosity, Mr. Bill Bailey.
Hello, and I'm also the museum's in-house keyboardist, regularly appearing up through a hole in the floor.
The Museum of Curiosity doesn't hoard knowledge in glass cases just for the sake of it. We only like the interesting bits. We don't care whether something's old or rare or priceless or important or not, as long as it makes you go, whoa.
Yes, it's true. People come here in search of knowledge, and if truth be told, they search long and hard. It's a very large museum, and there's practically nothing in it.
That's why each week we invite 3 trailblazers from completely different fields to offer up curious objects to add to the museum's collection. To increase the pace of this agonizingly slow process, we are delighted to have with us Professor Ronald Hutton, Professor Frank Close, and semi-professional Arthur Smith. And before we feverishly unwrap the presents our guests have brought with them today, let's have a quick rummage through their credentials. Ronald Hutton is Professor of History at the University of Bristol. He's a leading authority on magic, witchcraft, paganism, shamanism, and the legend of King Arthur. A prolific author, his latest book, The Druids, A History, is a comprehensive tome that covers everything we know about these mysterious coves. Ronald, how much do we know about the Druids?
Practically nothing.
Right, thank you very much. That's the end of that.
The point is that we know that they were the main religious and magical specialists in prehistoric Europe about 2,000 years ago. But since absolutely nothing that they believed was written down by them, nothing's come to us, we depend totally upon contradictory statements made about them by utterly unreliable ancient authors. What Druids have is a cool name, Druid, which no other priest or shaman of the ancient world has. They look interesting. You can have Druids in almost any form you like, and by golly, we have.
They're great. I love Druids. They're brilliant.
Yeah, you know Druids, Bill?
I met a Druid. I made this documentary about Stonehenge, and I got to meet an actual Druid. Terry the Druid, he was called.
Oh, come on, not Terry.
That was his
Druid.
name, Terry the Druid. Look him up, terrythedruid.com. And and he's an actual, your actual Druid. And he was fascinating. He was an ex-Hell's Angel.
Yeah. So Terry's an ex-biker who makes really fantastic homemade mead.
You know this guy as well.
Kind of earthy,
That's exactly him.
The same guy.
Yes.
There's more than one of these guys, though. It's not just Terry the Druid. There are some others.
No. There are thousands of them.
So can you be a sort of part-time Druid? Can you be a sort of bank manager during the week and then, go to Druidry on Sundays?
Being a professional Druid is quite hard, even if you make really good mead. So, yes, Druids are part-time by definition.
Did you know that Winston Churchill was a Druid?
Yes, indeed. Right. And he was initiated into the Ancient Order of Druids, which was founded by a carpenter in London, a Cockney called Henry Earle, in 1781, for working men, at a time when Freemasonry was the big noise in the block. And what Henry Earle wanted was something similar, but for ordinary working chaps who want to be able to develop their skill as singers and performers and musicians and have their own dignified space.
That's brilliant. I didn't realise that Druids was actually a Cockney social club.
Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Ronald Hutton. Now let's meet our next guest, Arthur Smith. Arthur is a writer and self-described semi-professional comedian who attended the University of East Anglia, where he stood for president of the Students' Union with the slogan, "Don't vote for me." He finished second of 9 candidates. Arthur recently curated an exhibition of his own in Edinburgh, featuring artwork made by comedians, including his own tapestry masterwork, a cushion bearing the legend, "Life's too short for embroid." He is currently researching and writing a lecture based on jokes and language, particularly foreign languages. Arthur, you've done stand-up in Paris, haven't you?
I have done stand-up in French, actually.
Could you give us a saw-off a little bit?
Well, actually, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a joke that was once told me by Gérard Houllier in French, right? Un gentleman, c'est un homme qui sait décrire une femme sans les mains. Thank you, Frank. What is it? It's only kind of French would do this sort of joke. A gentleman is a man who can describe a woman without using his hands.
Taxi pour monsieur.
I mean, obviously a lot of jokes don't translate. For example, a man goes to the doctor and says, I can't say my THs or Fs. The doctor says, well, you can't say fairer than that then. Obviously, in French, that would be completely meaningless. I mean, you could maybe construct a similar kind of joke, I suppose, but it would mean nothing, would it? I mean, you try doing stand-up in Japan, and, you've really basically got to go visual. Take your trousers down, fart.
This is the German, the Germans like knights of armour hitting each other over the head with sausages.
Yes, well, we like to think that Germans have no sense of humour. And it's true.
I'm not sure about that.
It isn't true. I don't think it's. I mean, there's actually a stand-up comic on the British comedy circuit called Henning Venn.
But Henning works in English, doesn't he? He tells jokes. And my theory is that the reason that Germans can't be funny in German is because of the word order. Because in a gag, the executive comedy word, as it's called, should be as far to the end of the sentence as possible.
Yes.
Whereas if you've got all these endless verbs, it's cucumber, blah, 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 was when before.
You can't do the sort of pull back to reveal, as it was.
No, because you reveal your cucumber at the front.
Yes. I was in Sweden once doing a show in a Swedish restaurant. And frankly, I was going down the toilet. They weren't laughing, and I just looked up and I decided I read the menu out, and it was hilarious because an Englishman trying to say Swedish words just sounded stupid. Metgungsskenkhörda. I don't know what was going on, but I was getting laughs.
Ladies and gentlemen, Arthur Smith. Well, finally, we have a high-energy particle physicist and astronomer. Frank Close is a professor of physics at Oxford and a best-selling author. Recently, he worked at the Large Hadron Collider project at CERN in Geneva. His latest book is intriguingly entitled The Void. Frank, the Large Hadron Collider has been described as a 21st century equivalent to the Apollo moon landings. What's going to be its one small step for man moment?
If I knew that, I'd be off to Stockholm getting the Nobel Prize now. It's the biggest experiment that has ever been done. The 27-kilometre long tunnel, it's as long as the Circle Line, but more reliable. And it's like a time machine, because what we do in there, we send little particles around, almost at the speed of light, smash them into each other, matter and antimatter, and they make a little flash in a very small volume for a brief moment, and what you're doing there is recreating what the universe was like about a billionth of a second after the real creation. You've all read Dan Brown's book about angels and demons. There are two correct statements in that book. There is a laboratory called CERN, and it has made antimatter, and nothing else.
Higgs bosons. Could you explain what they are and why they're important?
Yes, everything that we have discovered over the last century, starting from Einstein and the quantum theory and all these wonderful structures which work remarkably well, cannot be right. Because they work in a universe that doesn't exist, where things flit around at the speed of light. And it ain't like that. And the only theory we have is a theory that implies there has to be this thing called the Higgs boson. And that's why they're constructing this machine, in order to see if it's right or not.
You're saying that the purpose, well, one of the purposes of the LHC, because I'm down with the acronym, is to recreate the circumstances immediately after the Big Bang. So, just to set my mind at rest, is there any point where the circumstances will create something similar to the Big Bang?
There is this idea put about by some scurrilous TV programs like Horizon, who've got completely wrong, that we're going to destroy the universe.
Well, they've got it wrong.
I assure you that we won't, and if we do, you can't sue me. The most powerful things we can do here on Earth are puny in comparison with what nature does all the time. We're being blasted by cosmic rays right now. They're passing through us in this room all the time. The energy of these cosmic rays are vast compared with the things we're doing at CERN. And the Earth hasn't been destroyed by them. So the experiment's been done before. It's just the first time that we're going to be doing and seeing what it was like.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for Frank Close. Now let's hear what our three eminent experts would like to place in the museum. Over to you, Mr. Curator.
Thank you very much, Professor. Now, the museum is now open for donations. So, firstly, Arthur Smith, may we have your suggestion, please?
I want to put into the museum Arthur Craven. Arthur Craven was a character he was born in 1888, I think, and he was a great influence on the Dardaists. It was a kind of movement in reaction to the First World War, which had had all these certainties beforehand and classicism, and the First World War was such a ghastly, awful, murderous mess that the Dardaists were seeking something new that would react against this order and certainty, which doesn't exist. So they went for a kind of absurdity, and in a way, one of the great embodiments of this was Arthur Craven, who did a number of absurd things. Like in 1916, as an act of artistic bravado, he fought the then world heavyweight boxing champion, Jack Johnson. The outcome was predictable. He was once invited to give a lecture in New York to a bunch of eminent artists and academics on Dadaism, and turned up too drunk to speak. And his lecture took the form of his removing all his clothes and urinating on a table. To the Dadaists, this was, of course, counted as a great success. Especially given that Duchamp, who is probably the most famous Dadaist, created a urinal that he put into an exhibition. And this exhibit, which sounds silly in a way, and of course is, I mean, really, it's literally taking the piss. It was voted by the judges of the Turner Prize the most influential artwork of the 20th century.
What, more than an unmade bed? Surely not.
Well, you know, people like Tracy Emin and whatnot, in my mind, are all pale imitations of the Dadaists, because the Dadaists were prepared to try and get a laugh, in a way. Yeah. I mean, Arthur Craven he outraged the art establishment and was sort of ejected from France. He was ejected from everywhere, and eventually he died quite young. He disappeared in a rowing boat one afternoon on the Gulf of Mexico. And ever after, people have imagined that he's still alive. He faked his own death. I mean, in some ways, it was a tribute to someone like Shelley. He used to talk a lot about killing himself as a form of entertainment. And I think sometimes an audience have thought that themselves about certain members of people they've seen. You know, and he announced his public suicide at one gig, but he turned up, shot a gun into the ceiling and delivered a very boring lecture on Victor Hugo.
It sounds like an average night at the Fringe Club in Edinburgh, you know.
Well, I think the wilder nights at the Fringe Club, in some sense, owe something to this guy and to the Dadaists who hung around in Zurich in 1916, in Berlin, and then after the war. He was the true original because he kind of lived art. I mean, he was hopeless at poetry. He's a rubbish painter. He had no real actual ability other than to be this extraordinary character. So, you know...
Are these what you're proposing to have in the museum, or
I'm
the
proposing,
whole?
in a sense, his spirit of absurdity. The spirit of... Moon river wider than a mile. Unpredictability.
We were actually going to do a Dada experiment tonight.
That's right. One of the Dadaist founders was Tristram Sara, and he was apparently thrown out of the Surrealist movement for daring to create a poem on the spot by pulling words at random out of a hat. And in the theatre, this was in the 20s, a riot ensued and the theatre was wrecked. So let's try and recreate this seminal moment in the Dadaist movement. So I'll start then. The
Octopus.
Triangle.
Abbreviated.
Numpty. It's funny stuff.
It's a kind of a haiku, isn't it?
Haiku. We'll do one more. Jumping.
The
Sausage roll.
Giraffe.
Accountancy. only made sense.
Well, now we just have to decide where in the museum Arthur Craven's spirit goes.
Yeah.
Where would you suggest?
Well, the toilet is the obvious spot.
Along with all the other urinals.
So I think, if you bought a ticket and someone refers you to a curtain, the curtain opens and then a woman with a moustache punches you in the nose. The curtain shuts, that's the exhibition.
Thank you very much. Well, that's Arthur Craven in the gents. Thank you very much.
Professor Close, what have you got for us for your submission to the museum?
Well, I wanted to have something that was really impossible, even for a fantasy museum, and so I've chosen nothing. I don't mean just an empty room, I mean absolutely nothing. The void, the universe with everything removed from it, what it was like the night before creation. Imagine that there were no stars, no sun, no you or me or anything at all. So there's absolutely an empty universe. Now that could be nothing, but there'd be nobody to know that there was an empty universe. So the more I start thinking about nothing, the harder it becomes. So the exhibition anyway is impossible, because even if I could make nothing, any visitor would ruin it, because they'd be something. But I solved that one. I thought I'd put a sign on the door which said something like, "There's nothing here, go away." But I thought about how to actually make nothing. I mean, to make a cubic metre of nothing, we could start by sucking all of the air out. But with the best vacuum pump you've got, that'll still leave billions of air molecules left behind. So I thought, well, maybe we put it into outer space, where all the air's gone. The trouble is, if you're in outer space, I mean, you've got sunlight. OK, let's go to deep space, but you've still got starlight and gravity, whatever that is. It fills everything. And to get nothing at all, no gravity even, you'd have to remove absolutely everything that there is. So the only way perhaps to get back to real nothing is to go before the Big Bang, before time began. But what does before time began mean if there was no time for there to be a before? Well, there's one thing I do understand. There's definitely something now. So the idea that the universe could have erupted as a sort of quantum fluctuation out of nothing is a serious possibility that science is thinking about. And then I got an idea. Suppose I did manage to make a little bit of nothing. What would happen if a little quantum fluctuation happened in that bit of my nothing? And 1 billion years later, sentient beings in that little fluctuation started calling me the creator. They'd probably worship me, and I'd probably find that very embarrassing, because all I'd have done was nothing. So I thought, well, I suppose I'd probably hide away in an embarrassment so that they didn't know I was there, which might explain a lot, actually.
So, what is the opposite of nothing? Is it anything, something, or everything?
The answer is clearly yes.
Ronald, in other cultures, shaman or druids, do they have interesting cosmologies which are more convincing than these quantum fluctuations?
Not more convincing, a little more comprehensible. But then if physicists get things wrong, we're all going to die. If historians get things wrong, then everything's just a bit more exciting. So there's a considerable difference.
Is it the opening anecdote in A Brief History of Time? There's a lecture going on and an eminent cosmologist is giving a lecture and an old lady puts her hand up at the back at the end to ask a question. She says, well, this is all very well, but I believe that the world is resting on the back of an enormous turtle. And, of course, the scientist said, well, yes, aha, but what's the turtle resting on? And she says, well, you're a very clever young man, but I'm afraid it's turtles all the way down.
In fact, just to add one comment, seriously, you have at last got to the point why I and everybody does science. The question of where did it all come from has plagued every culture throughout history. And every culture has created its myth, starting with the turtles all the way down. And our modern myth, if you like, is the Big Bang. We can do experiments to test it. That's what we're trying to do. But ultimately, I'm a scientist because I don't know. We're trying to improve our ignorance, but it's ignorance that drives science.
Well, that's Frank Close's Nothing for the Museum. Thank you very much.
Lastly, we come to Professor Hutton. Can we have your submission, please?
Yes, with pleasure. Traditional museums have museum pieces, and museum pieces are things that are literally or conceptually dead. So I'm going to propose Father Christmas, because he is dead. He was murdered well over 100 years ago by a highly skilled assassin who then took his place. This, of course, is Santa Claus, who starts as a saint but then goes to live in New York, falls into criminal fraternities, finds a manager, and becomes the head of a multinational operation that is gradually taking over the entire planet. Father Christmas himself was born in 1616, and he's created by Ben Jonson, the friend of William Shakespeare, one of the great playwrights and poets. And he represents all that people love most about Christmas, which is about making merry. He's the ultimate party animal. He wears a green furry robe like holly and ivy and mistletoe, and he's about fun in midwinter. And then he gets taken over because we have Santa Claus come over from America, equipped with a particularly deadly weapon, and that is the child market. Because one thing that Father Christmas never did was pay special attention to children. And that's Santa Claus' particular sales pitch. He begins as a saint, a Greek saint, goes over to New York when it's a Dutch colony, New Amsterdam. So that's why he has a Dutch name, Santa Claus. But just like Spice Girls have a manager, Santa Claus has a promoter. And that's a professor of Hebrew at a New York college, who in the year 1822, a time at which nobody remembered Santa Claus even in New York anymore, wrote a poem which reinvented him as a guy who comes down chimneys to give presents to children, rides a sleigh drawn by reindeer who all have weird names like Donder and Blitzen, has elves to help him, and wears this weird, funny, furry outfit with a hood, and has a white beard like an emaciated Brillo pad. And that's it. He writes it for his children, but a friend sees the poem, nicks it, publishes it in a newspaper. Everyone loves it. It's the one that goes to us the night before Christmas. And all through the house, nothing was stirring, not even a mouse. So the poem becomes a bestseller, and everyone gets the idea, wasn't it nice to kind of give children presents the way that used to happen on old St. Nicholas's night, which is not at Christmas, another time. And so it becomes the favourite pastime of New York, crosses the Atlantic and takes over Britain, and Father Christmas dies. He simply goes quietly under and gets taken over. So Father Christmas is now an alternative name for the American who is associated with coming down chimneys, giving presents to children, and wearing this natty, furry outfit with a big white beard. And is with ever since, getting bigger and bigger. And nobody will have the will to resist. And all that because somebody thought of writing a poem for his children. Doesn't it chill the blood?
I should point out, of course, that Professor Hutton, for any children who are listening, is speaking metaphorically. Father Christmas is very, very much alive.
No, Father Christmas is dead because Santa has taken his identity.
No, he's alive. He's alive.
That's why we had to invent New Year's Eve as an adult festival, so the adults who have suffered through the family Christmas can misbehave seriously with their chosen friends by way of compensation.
You must have had better New Year's Eves than I ever have.
Yeah. He was originally a Dutch saint. Is that where the name comes from, this Sinterklaas?
Yeah, he's the Dutch name for a quite popular medieval saint who just happens to be the patron saint of children. There's a typical saint story invented hundreds of years after the guy's actual lifetime, but a nice one, about how he goes to an inn in time of starvation and finds this meat laid on his table, and what the landlord's been doing is cutting the throats of local orphans and putting them into pies. And of course, being a saint...
Happy Christmas, everybody.
Yes. No, the happy bit is, he doesn't just realise he's about to eat child pie, he resurrects the dead children.
Sorry, can you do that again, Ron? I'll just accompany you on the organ.
He resurrects the dead children.
Professor Hutton is available for children's party.
Arthur, How do you celebrate Christmas?
I do have a little party piece, which I believe you're inviting here, in that I can sing Jingle Bells backwards.
Okay.
And furthermore, I'm going to.
Go on then.
Eels nepo sona wanada root city and after war. Ewa uli slebonich.
Okay, now just to show that it really does work, we recorded that and we're going to play it back to you, back to front.
Jinobels, stilu Romras fanais nisturas nanawano so benzoi.
What's next then for Santa, the murderous imposter?
Apparently in Japan, they've got all the mythology all mixed up and you see Santas on little crucifixes. Have you heard that?
Yes. Yes, he's endlessly adaptable.
Yeah. I think Richard Dawkins has got a kid's book out called The Santa Delusion. He doesn't exist. Why can't you see? Look at the evidence. Stop crying.
Well, we very much welcome the original Father Christmas. Thank you, Ronald, into the museum. There we go. Well, finally, it's time to open the museum's suggestion box and find out what our esteemed audience, the friends of the museum, would like on display. So, your suggestions. My suggested curiosity is curiosity itself.
I've got one here. It's the jump leads from The Big Bang. It's quite a good one. I like that one.
That's good. I've got the collective silence of the cinema. That's very Dada, isn't it, that?
My suggested curiosity is the bulb for the light at the end of the tunnel.
So, Mr. Curator, another successful round of acquisitions. We've acquired a man who may or may not exist, another one who's missing, presumed dead, and a big fat load of nothing. So, time for a final thought from you, Mr. Curator.
I'd like to end up with a quotation from Bertrand Russell. Everything is vague to a degree you do not realise until you...
Thank you very much, and a very good day to you.
The Museum of Curiosity was curated by John Lloyd and Bill Bailey, with research by James Harkin, Xander Cancel, and QI. The exhibits were...